and I'm going to present to you, instance of a place that doesn't actually exist, but probably does exist. And this is one of my favorite, random tidbits that happen in history. The story goes, it's July 1954, 56-ish, dates vary slightly. It's a bright sunny day at the Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Japan. A plane touches down. Smartly dressed man, he's going through customs. He's bearded, he looks all normal. Spoke Japanese a little, and he's also fluent in many other languages, French being his native tongue. And as he's going through customs, the Japanese officials, they're very thorough people, they ask to see his papers. And he hands them this passport that I'm showing on the screen right now. It's a passport from the United Kingdom of Taured, identifying him as a Taured citizen. But yeah, basically he handed them a passport of a country which they didn't believe existed.
Sounds like a loony, honestly.
But anyways, this man came through, and the Japanese, the fur people, they're like, Taured does not exist. You have a passport which isn't a real passport. And this man is like, no, Taured exists. It's always exist. I know for sure. I'm a Taured citizen. I've lived in this country. This country's existed for over 1,000 years. I am a Taured citizen. And the Japanese were like, no, you're insane. It doesn't exist. And there's such a voracious argument that they're like, he can't just be doing this for a joke. So eventually they pull the map and they're like, yo, you're Taured man. Point out where is Taured. And he points to where modern day Andorra is on a European map. The Japanese were like, that's Andorra, not Taured. And he's like, no, I've never heard this place called Andorra. This place is Taured. And so the Japanese, they didn't really know what to do with him. So they're like, well, we'll put him in jail for the night and then sort it out later. And they came back in the morning and they were shocked to see that out of the great Japanese judicial system, he had escaped his jail and run away. And that is the man from Taured. So there are a few explanations for this. And in my skeptic mind, the part of myself I hate when I go to sleep, I'm like, yeah, this might just be, a hoax as well. But when I started looking into it, there might be something behind it. And it's kind of insane. So the first explanation has to do with a man named John Allen Zegras. Allegedly, some accounts state that this man from Taured was actually a man named John Allen Zegras. So in the 1950s, wanted to travel all around the world. However, a lot of countries you couldn't travel as well to. So he thought, why not make my own passport? Nobody checks passports anyways in the 1950s. I'll just make one that looks official enough. I'll go to the country, I'll show it off, and they'll just let me in and I can do whatever. He decided to make up a fictional country, name it Taured, and had the capital of Taman Rasat. And he always said, when asked where it was, he'd say, south of Sudan was his typical answer. So basically he started traveling on the world in this fake passport until he got to Japan, and the Japanese were a bit too smart for him. What do you think of this explanation? Because my initial response is always, it's the 1950s, yo. You could probably get away with making a fake passport and traveling around to, half the airports around the world.
Yeah, I actually think that is pretty accurate because, it's really hard to imagine now, but airport security and travel security was way less than it was now, especially with the amount of travel now and after 9/11, things have gotten way more tied down, and of course the records are much easier to find. So I think you could get away with making a passport like this. Honestly, most people don't know anything about the least bit about geography, so if you just make up a random name and say, well, of course it's there, and make a good con man, show a lot of confidence and do a bit of a con man thing, then you're probably going to get in.
Okay. Well, if you're skeptical, I have two other explanations for this, which get to a varying degree of what I would say believability. So the second one is a modification on the John Allen Zegras story. So in this modification, they claim that he wasn't actually a kind-hearted, traveler of the world, a seer of sights, if you will. He was actually a spy for the United Arab Republic, which is a country which was an amalgamation of modern Syria and Egypt, which split up a while back. And it alleges that he wasn't held up at the airport either. Instead, he was trying to deposit a forged check at the bank. So when they caught him at the bank, he was like, yo, no, I am from this country called Taured. Please do not arrest me. I have totally legitimate business here. The Japanese didn't buy it. And, they sent him to prison, or they convicted him. So this man, John Allen Zegers, according to this story, alleges that he was U.S. born, served in World War II. He later became an American spy serving in South Korea. He allegedly also had a South Korean wife with him at the time in Japan. And he eventually found his way over to the Arab Republic. I think he ran out of work for the Americans and he started freelance spying for them, which is where he got into this unfortunate situation. What do you think about him being a spy instead? Does that explain some more of his suspicious behavior? Or is that too much of a tall tale?
I I don't know. I think it's a spy story that I like spy stories, and this one sounds pretty nice. So I'm gonna want it. I'm gonna want to believe it. That's what I say. I like it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The funny tidbit to this one is that once he got arrested, he got the Japanese judicial system works pretty well. So he was sentenced to 1 year in prison. And immediately when he got the verdict, he tried to commit suicide while he was still in the courtroom, using a random piece of glass to try and cut his wrists in the courtroom, which is an
Oh my
extremely,
god!
yeah, it's very odd. It's like you couldn't have possibly thought that would have worked, right? Because anyways, I don't want to get into it. I just thought that was hilarious. And it didn't
I feel
work.
like this man is meant. I actually think he might be mentally ill.
I mean, that's not a bad
Well,
argument.
if he was a spy, he would have just had a canister of something good to kill himself, right? I mean,
Yeah,
he's a spy. He's gonna kill himself in a way that befits the spy instead of using a piece of broken glass, which is kind of pathetic.
that's what I was thinking. Yeah, but anyways, he got sentenced to a year and they deported him to Hong Kong afterwards and he was never seen from again. My third explanation, I love this one because it ties it together so well. So, it was not actually a man from Taured with a D, but from Torreg with a G. So, are you familiar with modern day Catalonia and the region of Catalonia in Spain?
Of course.
Yeah, so basically, in the 1950s, Catalonia was in a bit more of an autonomous state than it is today. And it was, it wasn't too much it was still a lot of government control, a lot of regime fighting, but, more free moving people in the area. And one of those free moving independent groups was a group of people who were ethnically Berbers, coming from around the Western Sahara region, and they ethnically were known as the Tuareg people, with a G, not a D. So allegedly, these Tuareg people they were living in and around Catalonia, and Catalonia, as we know, is between France and Spain. If you point to the map and you land in between France and Spain, it's very feasible you could hit Andorra instead. So the way some of these Tuareg communities and as well as like the Catalonian communities worked is that a lot of these people often didn't interact with people outside of their own society. They were very locked off, very, closed-minded communities where nobody really left to do anything, partially because everybody was scared of the great scary Franco who would kill you if he saw you looking at him the wrong way. So what some people think happened is that one of these communities, they really point to this town called Taured in a province of Loreda, which had existed for around 1,000 years. And they think that one of those communities decided, hey, one of our people are sick for some reason or something happened where they needed to go outside their community, go somewhere. However, they couldn't leave the country because they weren't naturalized Spanish citizens. They didn't have access to passports. So they think these people might have just got together, got their, smartest guy and given them a passport, which they told them, well, they have documents. This is a document. This must work the same way those passports work, except this passport was from Torad. And so this guy was shoved onto a plane, sent off to a country, and ended up being caught with a passport which he thought was legitimate from a country he had lived in for 1,000 years, and then was arrested for no reason, thrown into a jail cell, was frightened for his life because when people get thrown into jail cells under Franco, they tend not to escape the jail cells alive and immediately disappeared. What do we think of this explanation? Because I kind of love it. Felix, go ahead if you want.
Yeah, I think it's far fetched. That's
Do
yeah.
you think it's far fetched?
It would explain the suicide with just a piece of broken glass, right? Because you're just like, fuck. As soon as I get into that cell, I'm not gonna get the opportunity anymore.
Yeah, and I mean the suicide part isn't consistent across all tellings of the story, but yeah, I just think it sums up his insistence that that country existed so much because it did exist for him. I think that's such a beautiful way to tie it together.
Yeah, I get it, but no, I'm not buying it. That's the more point of it. It's
Ah,
this would probably be the one Simon would have thought about the most of how to perfectionize this one and sounds more plausible, but I wouldn't I wouldn't buy it.
I mean, the fourth explanation, Felix, and the fourth and final one, is that the man from Taured was actually from Taured, but traveled in a parallel universe and ended up in Japan instead, in our universe, where Taured was actually Andorra. So, I mean, that's my far-fetched explanation.
Well, I would buy that as a Trekkie.
You'd bite that one and not my. I feel like my tricks are not working here. But yeah, I guess to wrap up our Taured section, do we think Taured exists? Yes or no?
No.
No, I think it's a second Atlantis story.
Although I think the cool travelers is a cool explanation.
Think it might just be a con man. That's what I'm thinking. I think that wouldn't be the least plausible thing.
Okay, fair enough.